So auditory is if someone like looks like side to side, like right on where their ears are, they're like listening for something. So sometimes when I'm asking questions with as a subject, if I ask them a question and they look directly side to side, I'll ask like, whose voice are you hearing or who are you listening for? It's actually a sound,
that
right?
Is so cool.
Yeah. And then down in here, this bottom right is kinesthetic. So that's where the feelings are. Right. And this one, I remember us talking about when someone is emotional and they're like crying, what do they do to stop crying? They pull their eyes up away from the feelings box.
Welcome back to another episode of Built from the Inside Out. I'm so excited for today's guest. Her name is Delilah Abaya, and she is a transformational NLP practitioner. And I did a session with her, and I feel like it really helped me, so I wanted to share her knowledge with you guys. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Brianda, for having me. We're at like a podcast studio, and I'm like so excited.
I'm so excited too. We tried to record this before, and then the Wi-Fi was spotty, and then now we get to do it in person. So I'm very excited.
Yes. And it feels very aligned because I happened to move here like a week ago. And then when we were like emailing back and forth, it was like, wait, we can actually meet up in person. So I feel like it was divine timing.
I think so too. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do. What is NLP for those who haven't heard of it?
Sure. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. So it is essentially like a toolkit to be able to really see how people experience life. So we experience life through visual, audio, kinesthetic feelings, olfactory, gustatory, taste and smell. And when someone is struggling with wanting to get somewhere, oftentimes if they're really, really stuck, it's programming from childhood that is keeping them stuck, but actually it's keeping them safe, but it's just so like back in the system that it takes a little bit more cognitive, like, how should I put this? It takes a little more conscious awareness to like be able to unpack that. So for myself, NLP for me is like compassionate inquiry. So like in our session, I got to ask you like a billion questions to kind of clarify like what does your desire mean to you or what does that look like? And I get to really get on your map of reality. That's what we call it in our training. And not impose like my map of reality, like how I perceive something. It's like, well, how does Brianda see this and get to really understand like your world? So NLP for me is using language to unpack someone's experience, right? So if I say, I have anxiety. Well, anxiety means something for me and it means something for you. So anxiety, like anxious about what? And then we start to see like what's hidden underneath there. So someone could have like a fear of public speaking and that's their anxiety. And someone else could be like fear of heights and that's their anxiety. So using language to understand someone's like experience of life.
I love that. And I love that you say compassionate inquiry because that's really what it felt like.
Yeah.
You were so, like, it felt like you were like so kind, non-judgmental, just really trying to understand.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that. And I feel like it's different from counseling and coaching. So share with us, what is the difference between counseling, NLP, and coaching?
Yeah. So in my experience, counseling and therapy, I like absolutely loved my therapist. And for me, it was kind of having someone where I could share what my like week sounded like or what I'm struggling with. And they held the space for that, like a container, and was able to hear me and sometimes gave me information as to why I was acting that way, like psychologically. And that's really great. However, our experience with therapy sometimes is people can come to therapy with a red herring. So in novels and movies, the author or director can use a red herring, which is meant to kind of take the audience's attention away from like the real issue. It's like the plot twist. So someone could say like, oh, I'm struggling with this relationships because blah, 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 my dad. Like they could say something like that. However, if someone's able to consciously like tell you what that is, it's almost like the mind's way of like distracting from like the real pain sometimes.
Okay.
So with therapy, someone can verbally talk about something and it can be processed in that way, but it might not be able to get into like the deeper layers of like what's going on. So I like to use therapy sort of like, I think we used the analogy last time of like a dental cleaning, like a regular cleaning where you get to go and like get that regular checkup. And then for coaching, I like to think about coaching as where someone has done something and they've gone through the process, they've like climbed the mountain, and then they're coaching someone along the same path. So it's almost like you get advice from someone because they already know how to do it. They've gone through everything. They can give you the shortcuts. So the difference with NLP is as a practitioner, I'm not here to give advice. Like I don't actually know what you need. We as practitioners have a presupposition. We stand on the belief that like you have everything you need within you. And we kind of just open that up. And so what we track as practitioners is your physiology. So I know in our session, so our eyes actually, it's like a party trick that I like to share, give us a sense of like what we're like looking at inside of our minds, but it's happening so fast. It doesn't even register that that's happening. So in our session, I had asked you a couple questions and your eyes went somewhere and I asked you to keep your eyes there. And I'm like, who or what is your brain paying attention to on the inside? And you're like, I don't know. But I noticed that your breathing changed as you were looking in this one specific spot. So I guess for me to answer your question, like the difference between therapy and coaching is I'm trained to track these things as like, what is your body doing? Where are you looking? And then getting really curious about like where that is and why, that maybe a therapist isn't trained to like notice those things. And then the thing that showed up for us, with your family member, we were able to go into that experience a little deeper and unpack that. So
yeah, I love that you say that you don't give advice, that you feel like the person has everything within. Because I was telling my cousin about you. And and he was very interested in what you do. And he's like, okay. He was like, so she's going to tell me what's wrong with me. And I was like, no, you're going to tell her. She's just going to ask you questions.
Yeah, asking questions. And also even that language, like what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? It's actually, we're working exactly as Mother Nature like set us up to be. When we experience something that was emotionally confusing, the brain absolutely hates confusion. That is like the most uncomfortable experience for like a human being. And so our brain creates like a narrative to make sense of stuff that doesn't make sense of. So as a child, we only have like so much information and then we make decisions and beliefs based on those moments. And so we're not working incorrectly and there's nothing wrong with us. So it's almost like being able to not make ourselves wrong. So in our training, we say to not turn against ourselves, right? Like shaming ourselves doesn't actually change anything. But when we like go in and like really hold that non-judgmental space, things can start to shift. So yeah, it's almost like is it your cousin? It's getting curious about why he's doing certain behaviors and even understanding the why, and then like being able to look at his younger self and be like, wow, like little guy, like you're doing the best. You were brilliant to get out of the situation, but that programming is now stuck in a loop and we can get it out of the loop. But it doesn't help to judge.
Right. Yeah. And I love that because, and he even mentioned, he's like, I try not to remember certain things.
Oh, wow.
So, and another question, one of the questions I had asked you was like, do you ever get any clients who don't want to open up or they just get stuck on the I don't know? Maybe they're scared of being judged.
Yeah. So we try our best, I'll say I, to not work harder than the person in front of me. Like I'm willing to work as hard as they're willing to work and they might not be there yet. And that's okay. So as much as I want something for them as a practitioner, it's on their time. And it's almost like if I were a doctor and, you know, stitched up someone's wound, I don't get to decide how quickly that wound heals, right?
Okay.
It's almost like working in flow and in tandem with the other person. And in my training, I am learning how to mirror someone. So there's a lot of things that I'm doing behind the scenes where when someone like moves in a certain way, I match them. And the reason I do that is because there's a critter brain that we have that's like a survival brain. And that when we breathe with someone and we move very similar to them, that part of our brain goes, I'm with like kind.
Okay.
Right? If you ever like, one of the funniest things is like when girls go to the club and like we're all in the bathroom and we all have the same energy and like we feel so safe because we're like, we're with like kind. All these girls are like the same, right? So that's kind of the same energy. So when I'm able to match that and their nervous system like relaxes, people will open up.
Okay.
Right? And also when they notice that I'm genuinely wanting to understand their experience, not from a judgmental way, not to tell them that they're wrong, not to give them advice, like people just spill, right? And I take in that information and I get really curious. It's like, what do they mean by this? What do they mean by that? So I've worked with people who have had really, really intense experiences, but I have tools in NLP where I can get them to almost like make it like a movie scene and like move it away from themselves. So there's a little bit of distance and they can look at the thing and be away from it, right? I can let them know like, hey, you're safe. You're here with me. This is actually just a picture in your mind. So if there is resistance, that's actually a really good sign too, because if someone is willing to tell me, hey, like I'm not feeling it, that means they trust me to not judge them for resisting too, if that makes sense. So yeah, there have been experiences where people, it's really intense, and whether or not they want to get into it, I'm there for them, whether they want to go into it or not, but they know that I'm there to support them and guide them through it.
Yeah, I felt that way whenever we did our session.
Yay!
Yeah, and I think it's so cool how you mentioned that you notice body language, you notice the breathing, you notice where the eyes go, and we'll go more into that. But just to touch a little bit on our session that we did together, that really stood out to me because I've studied psychology, I've done coaching, but it was different whenever you asked me a question, and I didn't even realize that I looked somewhere, and you were like, keep your eyes right there. And I was like, oh, what's happening?
Right.
How you told me to see it as a movie, to feel like, how does that younger version of me feel? What does that person in the other room feel? Kind of step into what they're feeling or what they're experiencing. And I feel like that was life-changing for me because it allowed me to see them in a different light. I had anger that I held on for so many years. And when you told me to step into what they were feeling, I was able to feel compassion for them. I was able to see it from their point of view and not justifying it, but just understanding you were trying your best.
Yes. Yeah. And so one of the presuppositions of NLP is that everyone is choosing the best option and best choice on their menu, the best feeling option. And that might not make sense to us on the outside, but it makes sense to them. And with, the self-development world, oftentimes it's like willpower, grit, all these things. But it's almost like if there's programming in place, we can't will ourselves into changing, but we can give ourselves more options. And so what your experience was stepping into this person and realizing that the only choice they had that they thought they had was this, acting in this way. And then when you were able to experience that, you're like, wait, wow. Like that was very different than what I thought it was on the outside. So for everyone, listening, we have representations. So that's what we kind of call, they're not memories because it's almost like different than a memory. It's just there. It's present in our experience. So they're representations of something that we experienced. And so your representation was like almost like in the movie Inside Out, it was like this bubble.
Okay.
And so like I got to have Brianda like rewind it and like see all the we call them key players in the representation.
Okay.
And then just notice what was going on and then step into the experience of the other person. So we don't realize that we're actually like much more connected than like society tells us that we are. Like if we were in a room, we could close our eyes, and if I asked you to like step into me, like you could mentally float into my body and see what it feels like to be me. And we call that a switch. So in that experience that you had, I had you step into this person and feel their experience, and that gave you more information than you had, you know, when you experienced it and when you were, I think you mentioned you were trying to talk through it in therapy. So it just was like a different, I want to say like vantage point, right? And when you had that extra information, it really changed how you perceived the entire like little bubble.
Because like you mentioned, I had done therapy for it and I had cried it out. And then in coaching, I had done a different exercise to heal from it. And I had also cried it out. So I thought I was done with that. Yeah. And then when we had our session, I realized I was still holding on a little bit of it. And after our session, I feel like I was able to let it go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And you know, what I do works in tandem with therapy and coaching, right? Like the way that you were able to give me the information of that experience, it was because you had already done therapy. So I'm really grateful that you already had that when we worked together, because sometimes it just maybe takes a little bit more time. If someone hasn't ever like looked at this experience before, it takes a little bit more time. So it was a little bit fast tracked for you, which is amazing. And what we like to say in NLP is we can't change the past, obviously, but we can change the meaning of the past, right? And so this experience had a meaning for you, and then we went back and changed the meaning. And then that's what kind of resolved it. So what we do is we resolve it. It's resolved.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, I also wanted to mention for anyone listening, it changed my relationship with this person. Like it was already better, but after me being able to understand a little bit and actually feel compassion for them, I feel like it has been even better than it was. And so going back to what you were talking about, the eyes, tell us a little bit about what that means, because that was new to me.
Right. So just comment back on what you were saying about you and this person. Like that's true empathy, right? To like really understand someone else's experience is empathy. And now with that empathy, you can have a lot more compassion for them and like understand them, even if, you know, what they do doesn't make sense to you. Like you're allowed to have your experience and I'm allowed to have my experience, but there's no more resistance to wanting them to be different. It's like the serenity prayer. It's like, the courage to change the things I can. And you realize you can't change other people, but like there's almost like an acceptance now. So for the eyes, it's always really fun to like teach. So the first 8 months of my training was a lot about the eyes and the physiology. So when you said body language, we call that physiology. So I'm tracking someone's physiology, even if someone were to use like air quotes for something, and I use air quotes like to match them, again, their critter brain says, oh, like this person gets me, you know, and that helps open things up. So for our eyes, so imagine your eye line, and if you look up, these are where our brain creates pictures. So up here, right? And so if our eyes, and this is just a general like party trick summary, it's very different depending on like what someone's brain decides to like log. So up is pictures, up and to the right is visual. We call it visual construct. So that's where people construct pictures. So if I asked you to think about like a pink elephant, your eyes would most likely go into this corner because maybe that doesn't exist.
Right.
So unless you saw like a picture book of it, and you have to create a pink elephant. If I asked you to just think of like a regular elephant, you could go up and to your left because that's visual remembered.
Okay. So
you're
when you
remembering.
lie, you also look up and to the right?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I can't comment on that because I'm not sure about that one. So that's what, you know, that's the general sense that we know. And when you think about students, if a student is a visual learner and our test is right here and we're writing and then there's a question and you're trying to think of like the answer, kids aren't allowed to look up, right? Because if they were like to look up, the teacher would be like, eyes on your test.
Oh, yeah.
So it's almost like if we had this information like out in the world, we could, you know, help support. Maybe that's why like kids don't test well because they're visual and they have to like look up here and generate the pictures of their notes, but they can't. So it's like really interesting.
That's interesting, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
This episode was sponsored by the Injury Paralegal with Adam and Garza Law Firm. If you guys are ever in an accident, they are the people to call. I personally use them whenever I was in an accident. And throughout the whole process, they always made me feel like family, like my health was their priority. And they were able to get me a settlement that I was happy with. So if you guys are ever in this situation, I recommend you save her phone number. I'll share it on the screen. Go follow her on Instagram, the Injury Paralegal, and just have this information on you because you just never know. Hopefully nothing ever happens. But at least that way, for example, when it happened to me, I had the adrenaline going. This had never happened to me. I wasn't sure what to do. I called Monse, and then she guided me throughout the whole process. They also speak Spanish, so if you or a family member doesn't speak English, you guys can also give them a call.
So, and then auditory. So auditory is if someone like looks like side to side, like right on where their ears are, they're like listening for something. So sometimes when I'm asking questions with as a subject, so we call the client a subject or client. If I ask them a question and they look directly side to side, I'll ask like, whose voice are you hearing or who are you listening for? It's actually a sound,
That
right?
is so cool.
Yeah. And then, sorry, I like when I sit with a client, it's like flipped. So let me see. This is the right side. So down in here, this bottom right is kinesthetic. So that's where the feelings are. Right. And this one, I remember us talking about when someone is emotional and they're like crying, what do they do to stop crying? They pull their eyes up away from the feelings box. So we like do these things that we don't even track that we're doing them. So that's usually where feelings are. The kinesthetic emotions. So like you said, anger, sadness, and that gets logged there. And then down into the left is auditory digital. So that we say is internal talk. So if someone is like just kind of defocused, like right here, it's like, hey, like what are you saying to yourself on the inside? Because they're talking, it's a little like internal monologue. So that's kind of like the basics of it. And so I'm always tracking like where someone's looking and just getting really curious. So if I ask them a question and their eyes go boop, eyes go boop, like, so then I, really get them to unpack like what is it that they're looking at right there. So normally, like I said, like the past and the present. However, if someone goes through something really traumatic and their brain is like, we need to watch out for this, they're going to log it in their future so that they're looking out for it. Like, let's say someone went through like a really bad bullying experience. So they're always going to look out for their bully. So, but then in a weird way, you're like anticipating it. You're like looking for it. You're looking for this bully in like every crowd out there. So that could be really affecting someone, right? They're just like always scared of this bully that they experience in like the 7th grade or something. And so a technique that we do is we're able to move this back into the past for someone after it's like worked through.
Yeah, that's so interesting. For me, I was looking down into the left, so I was in my feelings. But I also remember you said you can't feel in the I think it was in the past or the future. You only feel in the present.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. That was probably one of my favorite quotes from the training is we can't feel things in the past or the future. We feel them now. So if I were to think like, okay, go back to like 5th grade and feel happy. Like you would feel that joy now.
Right, yeah.
So that part of our brain or our body doesn't exist in time. It's like here. So if we're angry at something that happened 10 years ago, we're angry now, right? And that could be affecting us. So
yeah, I thought that was so interesting because that also tells you like it's not healed if you're angry today because you're not angry. You weren't angry back then. You're still carrying that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're essentially humans in like the flesh, but like that part of us works in patterns. So it's so interesting to think that like it's neurolinguistic programming, like as if we're like AI or like robots and we can be programmed. But, you know, in Buddhism, they had these 5 senses, like sight, taste, you know, all of it, all 5. So it's not far from the things that are taught in like those spiritual practices.
Okay. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that you had me anchor myself and then look up and to the right.
Yeah. I love that you like know the terminology.
I learned it on the last episode. I was like, you made me put my finger here. What does that mean?
Yes. So how an experience gets programmed, right, is it kind of runs on a loop. And so I like to think of NLP as like an iOS update for yourself, right? So with coaching, think about it as they're adding apps. Like, how do I do this? Add an app. Here's advice. Here's more tools. But what if all of that is still not working? You most likely need an iOS update to kind of like work out some of the bugs, right?
Yeah.
So if someone has had an experience, I'm just going to use myself. So I had an NLP session where I had told the programmer, like, I'm really messy and I don't know like why. And I've tried like all these things, like apps, right? I've tried all these apps to like clean and all these books and like nothing's working. And so we had an NLP session and it was, I think I was maybe like 3 or 4. And I'm at the dining table and I spilled juice and my mom just freaks out. And as like a 3 or 4-year-old, I'm confused. Like, why is mom acting this way? And so my little kid brain decides, oh, I'm messy. And that logged as an identity. So no matter how much stuff I was doing to try to be clean and to be neat and organized, I had this identity running that I was messy, right? And so that is playing on a loop. And so what the anchoring does, so in Brianda's session, we had unpacked an experience, and then we want to give that version of you resources. Resources as in, what do you know now that like that version of you would have liked to know? And so a lot of times it's letting them know that they survived, because if they dissociate it out of their body, they don't know that they survived this thing. They don't know that it's safe to come back into the body. Letting them know that, hey, things have changed. Like, we don't live at home. We're not like a teenager anymore, right? We get to make our own choices. So how we bring those resources in is through a state. So if I ask you to like think of a time when you felt super joyful, like you can feel that state in your body. And what we want to do is anchor that state into like a point in your body.
Okay.
And then when we take that resource into our past self, it creates new neural pathways, because the old pattern was running on this like loop.
Okay.
It's almost like every time it ran, it hit a point. It was just replaying, kind of like that movie Groundhog Day. Like, you're just replaying the same thing over and over again. And creating new neural pathways helps you like get out of it. Creates a new meaning. We said earlier that we're creating new meaning for the experience. So that's what we did with you. So we were able to squeeze in some like resources and bring it back to you to create new neural pathways. And like you feel different. So
And another thing I loved was like we talked about a fear I had. And you were like, what's the worst that can happen if that fear comes true?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you really think about it, you're like, oh, it's really not that bad. So I shouldn't be letting it stop me. So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. Was that like when we were looking for your desired state in the beginning?
Yeah. You said what, because I keep doing this thing where I get all these certifications, but then I don't actually put them to use or to work. And it's because I had a fear. And so you helped me realize, like, this is the fear you have. And then what's the worst that can happen if this fear comes true? It's really not that bad.
Right.
Yeah.
The question is, like, what would happen if you did? Right. So a lot of times using language, we get stuck in our own language, right? We're like, oh, I have to do this. So then the compassionate inquiry is, what would happen if you didn't? And then our brain goes, that was an option.
Yeah.
Right. So the questions expand where we're stuck. So as a programmer, I play like the video game Zelda. Like it was like from my childhood. And in it, there's like a map. It's in the little corner. And so imagine as I work with someone, I'm just like highlighting more spaces in their map. And if I'm ever in a place where like they're stuck and I'm stuck, a question is the thing that like expands it. It's like, oh, I have to do this, or or if someone will say, oh, I'm not disciplined. Oh, according to whom? And then their brain goes, oh my God, like, you know what I mean? So like we get stuck in our own like train of thought. And so the compassionate inquiry like expands like what's true for that person.
Yeah. And earlier when you mentioned how you were telling yourself that you were messy, I had that too. And it was because I was told that I was, so it's something that I'm getting better at. But yeah, it's been a process of just being organized. And that's the one thing that I also struggle with. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And then in that one for me as a subject, when she had me step into my mom had like the longest day at work. She was a nail tech, so she's like cleaning and sterilizing her supplies all day, cleaning her station. And like the last thing she needed was like little me like spilling something, right? So she had a very like emotional reaction to something that, is quite minor, like spilling juice.
Right.
But like what the programmer asked me was like, knowing what you know now of like all the struggles that you had about like cleaning and keeping your space neat, is that what your mom wanted for you? And I'm just like sobbing. I'm like, no, like it's not what she wanted.
Right.
But she's human and she was at the end of her rope. But she didn't think that like her freaking out about spilled juice was going to like imprint in me as a belief that I'm messy.
Yeah.
Right. So even knowing that like released a lot of shame that I used to feel about, the mess. So I wouldn't say that like after an NLP session, I'm like, Martha Stewart and like my place is immaculate, but the shame that I used to feel and the resistance, it's not there anymore.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about you, how you came across NLP and what made you want to do this.
Yeah. So I love that we're doing a podcast for YouTube and that you and I are like on this YouTube journey because I actually found my practitioner on YouTube. Her name is Jessica Dufour. Her YouTube is Subconscious Designs. And I was really struggling with friendships. I would have these friendships that like fell apart, but not in like okay, we're like mutually gonna, not be friends anymore. It was like World War III, like bombs and burned bridges. And I'm like, what is happening? It was like 3 relationships like back to back. And like, it occurred to me that like, I'm the common denominator. Like, why is it like I'm part of the problem? Like it's a pattern. So,
and I feel like that takes a lot too, to say, hey, I'm the common denominator.
Yeah. I'm like, this isn't, I don't think this is normal. And so it was a hard pill to swallow. But I had to recognize like, I have responsibility and accountability to like how to change my own life. And so I found her videos. One was about like love addiction. And then she had this playlist about like the fight, flight, fawn, freeze. And I read it or I listened to them, and with the fawn one, I was just like crying. And so I had binged her YouTube channel. There's so much valuable information on there. And then when I realized, like, you know, things weren't really moving with therapy, and you know, like, I don't know where you would find a coach for like failed friendships. You know, I don't know if that exists. So I was like, wow, this woman already gave me so much amazing education. Let me reach out to her. So I reached out to her, and she had like an NLP package. So I did 3 NLP sessions and something called a family constellation. So that was her package. And like I said, like the first one, I was like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced, NLP, because she really held that space for me. And I, like that first one, it was 2 hours, right? And versus therapy is usually like 45 minutes, an hour. And I like to say that sometimes therapy feels like I just got warmed up and then it's done. Like the session is done. And so I really enjoyed that it was 2 hours. It's just really life-changing when someone can sit with you for 2 hours and like really honor your experience. Like that's a lot of time, right? And so after that session with her, I was like, this is amazing. Like I like couldn't get over it. And so we had a couple more. And then I just always knew that if I was really struggling with something, and again, the apps aren't working and I just can't really get myself out of it, then an NLP session is very helpful. So I am able to like reach out to her whenever I need support. So that's how I found NLP. And it just really changed how I saw myself. So one of the very first sessions I had was, I didn't even know it was related, but it was actually the story I would tell my therapist when I got diagnosed for ADHD. And it was about like me, I was like in one of my classes, it was like math, and like one of the students behind me just like had sniffles, and it was like dripping faucet. I couldn't focus. And I was like so angry. And so she had me step into like this, I think I was maybe 10 or 11. She was like, what's going on for that little Delilah? And it was like, I feel like my brain is broken. So like little me thought because I couldn't do this test, I couldn't get my focus off my classmate, that my brain was broken. Isn't that like so sad? Like to think of an 11-year-old like making that judgment, because like I guess I did well in school up until that point. And then she's like, okay, well, what would happen if your brain was broken? And I start sobbing. I was like, my family's gonna abandon me. Like, oh, like, you know, and that feels weird to say now as like a 32-year-old. Like, I know my family didn't abandon me, but that's what this 11-year-old thought. Like, she truly believed that. So even in saying that, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that's how heavy school felt for me. That if I didn't do well in school, that I was going to get abandoned. Like, it's not true, but that's how this little one thought. So that's who I worked with. And then after working with her for like a year, we had a few sessions in between. I did a testimonial for her because it was just such a great experience. And when I rewatched, she had posted it on YouTube. When I rewatched it, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm lit up talking about NLP. So I reached out to her. I was like, hey, like, do you mind if I ask you like where you did your training? And when I was living in San Francisco, it was only 40 minutes away from me, the school.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's awesome.
And they did a lot of like online. But yeah, the training I'm at is called NLP Marin. And then their lineage of NLP is called Transformational NLP.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I didn't know you back then, but like my experience with you so far, it's been like you seem like this great person. You're always so happy, so excited, very like non-judgmental, and so I'm sure like you're able to have a lot of friendships now. I would imagine.
So I think before the pattern that I was in was this very people pleasing. So I would unconsciously do things for people to like approve of me and like me and not reject me. But then I would be resentful when they didn't match it. Like, but like I didn't realize I was doing that. So that's like people pleasing kind of behavior. And again, it's not even to judge that I was a people pleaser. It's to notice that I was in that pattern of people pleasing because of things I experienced in my childhood. So it's like not to make myself wrong. It's just to, you know, do the iOS update to know that I don't have to do that to connect with people anymore.
I love that. And I know you hear a lot of different stories. So some of them might be pretty heavy. What do you do to kind of cope with that or not let that affect you personally?
Oh yeah, I remember when we did the first podcast, I like teared up after this question because they tell us in our training that we do have to let our heart break. Because it's like so sad to think about what these children have gone through, and but then they're also the adults sitting in front of us. So like we know that they survived, but it's so sad. So I would say that because I had done a yoga teacher training, so I have a lot of tools and modalities to ground myself. So I use like my sound bowl, like before and after a session. I know to like go and take a walk and like take my shoes off, ground my energy. But sometimes like after a session, I just get in the shower and I cry. Like because I need to discharge that energy because my heart is absolutely breaking for their experience. Like, you know, sometimes I'm like, no child should have to ever experience that. But they did, and they survived, and they're okay now. So I have to kind of like hold on to that. So to answer your question, lots of different like ways to regulate myself, but I trust that like they're okay and I'm okay, and I have to just move that energy through. So it does happen where they actually say that in our training that we switch into others. So I have to notice when I'm in them and not me. And we have techniques where I like squeeze my leg and I like feel like my toes to so come back into my body because I can't help them if I'm crying with them in a session. But it takes a lot of energy for me to stay right here. And then once I'm done with the session, I'm like, oh, okay. Because I'm human, right?
Right, yeah, I can imagine. I think that was one of my fears. Since I'm doing coaching, I wanted to do counseling, but I might just stick with coaching, but we'll see. But yeah, that was one of my things. I was like, what if someone comes with me with this very like heartbreaking story? How do I emotionally detach and not let it affect me? So that's good that you have your techniques.
You know, they teach us to, we can feel it and then come back so that we know what it is that they're experiencing, but we don't have to take it with us.
And I think that's important. Yeah. This episode was brought to you by BCN Supplements, our all-natural supplement company. And for our listeners, we do have a discount code if you visit our website, www.bcnsupps.com. You can use code BUILT, BUILT, for 10% off. Thank you so much for listening. So we wanted to surprise our listeners.
Yes.
We want to give away a free NLP session for anyone who is interested in it, has never heard of it, maybe is dealing with some things and something in our conversation kind of clicked with them and they were like, ooh, I could benefit from this. So do you want to talk a little bit about what the rules are for them to enter the giveaway?
Sounds great. So Brianda was kind enough to pay for a session to give away to the listeners. And so my YouTube channel is still new and I'm working on like setting up my space now that I've moved here to make new videos. But my YouTube channel is at Delilah Abaya. And it'll be linked down below. So if you can go on, subscribe, and watch my latest video, give it a thumbs up, and then comment in the comment section something that you're experiencing, you're struggling with, that you might need like an iOS update for. And then Brianda will select the lucky winner.
Yeah. So to summarize it, make sure you follow her or you subscribe to her YouTube. You go watch her latest video, give it a like, and then comment on it. And then we'll choose from the comments. And then also make sure you subscribe to this channel as well.
Yes. And then in an NLP session, it's 2 hours where, again, we are working together, compassionate inquiry, kind of getting to the root of the problem and being able to hold that space for it.
Yeah. And even if they don't, so you're in Vegas now, but even if they don't live here, you're able to do it
online. Yeah.
Online.
This is via Zoom.
Yeah. That way you're able to read them. And,
Yeah. You know, people like my trainers do sessions in person too.
Okay.
So it's a little interesting because I squeeze you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Before we go, do you have anything else that you would like to share?
No, I think like this was such an honor to do, and I'm still very new in like my practice. I just completed the master's level NLP.
And then you also mentioned whenever you did your session with, you said Jessica Dufour, she also offered family constellation.
Yeah.
What is that, and do you also do that?
Yeah, so family constellations, there's a show on Netflix called Another Self that like will explain it way better than I can.
Okay.
So Another Self, it's a Turkish show that's dubbed in English.
Okay.
So family constellations, when we come to Earth, a lot of times as babies, if we notice someone is forgotten or there's pain that's not looked at, we like decide to hold on to it as babies. And yeah, so it's ancestral healing.
Okay.
And so in the show, they depict what it's like to be in a constellation. People will have roles and they don't know who they are, but they'll all of a sudden just start feeling like really angry and like not want to look at this person and like want to fight somebody. And you're just like, who is that? And you find out it's like a great-great-grandfather that was like a soldier in a war or something. And so oftentimes when we come to Earth, like our role gets enmeshed with another person in our lineage. Have you ever seen the movie Coco?
I haven't.
You haven't?
No.
Okay, so it's in that, I would say in that movie, it's almost like a family constellation. The main character takes on something that hasn't been worked through in the family. And then there's like a hero's journey that he goes through. So family constellation, I feel like if NLP is something that you experience, right? Like in your experience, you had something, you were there. Family constellation is things that have happened before you were even born. So in my family came from the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of like war trauma, things like that. And I didn't experience it. So an NLP session, it wouldn't uncover that because like it's not in my awareness.
Right.
So yeah, there was some stuff that was familial and got to work through.
Okay. That's so interesting because I've heard of it before.
You have? Okay.
But I don't fully understand it.
Yes. So
Jess,
I attend a lot of Jess's constellations. So if you're interested, again, it's her YouTube is Subconscious Designs. And so I'm not being called to do family constellations quite yet. I do know that like a lot of my peers and my teaching assistants, they do the full NLP training before they do constellations because NLP helps you just understand the human experience. And then constellations feels like a little bit of the next level. So I'm learning to, take one step at a time. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. I love this episode. I feel like a lot of people are going to take a lot from it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for being open to like experiencing an NLP session and for me to share like what this is with the world because it really changed my life. And I know that it's helped a lot of people that I've sat with and I really want this to be out in the world.
Yeah. And thank you for suggesting that I do an NLP session before because I was able to experience it.
Yeah.
It helped me. And then now I can like understand a little bit more when we talk about it.
Yeah. And let me know about your cousin.
Yeah. Oh, all her info. Go follow. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll see you guys on the next one.